Welcome to the Soul Potential CEO podcast. I am your host, Tia Marie, and today we are going to be talking about the new ego theory. So, I'm going to do a series of podcast episodes on my book that is coming out called The New Ego Theory: Evolving Consciousness Through the Divine Operating System, a practical framework for reprogramming reality and realizing soul potential. So, today we're diving into one of the most misunderstood concepts in psychology and spirituality: the ego. Now, I get it. When I say ego, what comes to mind? Probably not great things, right? We've been conditioned to think of the ego as the villain in the story of our personal growth, something to overcome, transcend, or suppress. What if I told you that everything you've been told about the ego is wrong? What if the ego isn't the enemy, but actually your greatest untapped resource? For decades, the ego has been painted as the bad guy. Psychology tells us it's the mediator between our conflicting desires, while spirituality often frames it as a barrier to enlightenment. But here's the issue: this narrative traps us in a never ending battle against ourselves. Think about it. If the ego is the enemy, then every thought, every reaction, every moment of insecurity becomes another fight. And what happens when you're constantly at war with yourself? Exhaustion, frustration, and worst of all, stagnation. I want to reinforce this because I know it's a bold, obnoxious statement to say that the ego is the most misunderstood concept in spirituality and psychology, but I really believe this to be true. So, if we look at the history of ego in the mainstream narrative, and it's not that the stepping stones of our relationship to understanding the ego, identifying the ego, exploring the way we interact with the ego, it is not inherently wrong that the ego ends up causing us problems. It is not inherently wrong that we meet distorted aspects of ourselves, depending on our relationship to the ego. It is not wrong that the ego is a big component in our identity. It is more that it is underdeveloped or stunted in its evolution when we choose to look at our relationship to ego this way without questioning, well, what's the next step? It's not enough to identify a problem and then spend our lives solving the problem within the context of the problem. At some point, we have to rise above that issue and start having a different conversation with ourselves. And the new ego theory is a part of that conversation. It sparks that conversation. In fact, it presents that conversation in a way where I haven't seen it presented before. So, in Freudian roots, psychoanalysis in the traditional sense define the ego as the mediator between the ID, our instinctual desires, our animalistic desires, and the super ego, one that has moral conscience. And while this framework has been foundational, it oversimplifies the ego's complexity and evolution as a concept in modern psychology. The negative perception of that frame is that many people interpret the ego as a problem or a barrier, rather than a functional aspect of self regulation. And so, this misunderstanding can lead to resistance or mismanagement of the ego's role in our operating system. From a contemporary approach, modern psychology views the ego as part of the self identity, But it also emphasizes the importance of adaptability and integration. So, concepts here like ego strength or resilience building, balance, growth, right? So, the newer positions of awareness are looking to maximize, not suppress our relationship to the ego. In spirituality, quite often there's this enemy narrative. So many teachings vilify the ego. They suggest that it must be transcended or destroyed in order to achieve enlightenment. This creates a combative relationship with the self. Like it feels so incredibly obvious to me. Your narrative about that fosters internal conflict. And from a dualistic view, the ego is often framed as the lower self, in contrast to the higher self. And while this can be helpful as a metaphor, it actually oversimplifies the ego's multifaceted role as a bridge between the physical and spiritual realms. There's a lot of overemphasis on ego death. And practices that promote this type of work can sometimes neglect the importance of integration, right? Of the purpose of struggle and challenge in our lives, our ability to evolve beyond what limits us. And so, finally, I just want to talk about where this misunderstanding stems from. It's really steeped in binary thinking. This concept that the ego is either good or bad or spiritual or unspiritual, rather being understood as a dynamic, adaptable aspect of our consciousness, to me is very short sighted. There's also the issue of a lack of integration. So, if we're not emphasizing the ego's role as a tool for growth and we're focusing on transcending, eradicating, alchemizing, removing the shadow, like looking at ourselves with this enemy that we are attempting to utilize higher awareness or spiritual awareness or psychoanalysis or the depth of our own internal understanding of ourselves to battle an inner demon, you're not really seeing yourself as whole and correct. And so there's this major indiscretion that is happening, this major, massive distortion in my awareness around coming to the table with that conversation as part of your toolkit to begin with. So I want to talk about what this outdated narrative does to us. It reinforces self doubt. You start to believe that there's something fundamentally wrong with you. Everything in life, truly, when it comes to processing, data processing, which I cover in great depths inside of the new ego theory, it's like the information that you're processing determines the data that you receive. So, if you are feeding a corrupted story, AI is a good example of this. Like, imagine that the only data or information that AI had to process was all false. We already know there's a lot of false information out there, but just put yourself in this situation of imagining this. Say it was just like a bunch of garbled nonsense. And you go in to utilize AI as a tool for you, trying to get some good information, but it's just lorem ipsum on steroids. Absolutely incoherent, makes no sense. What do you expect to get out of that tool? You're just going to get out the results of the information field that the tool has access to. So if you're having the same type of conversation with yourself about ego, you can only expect to get off information because you're not coming to the table with a correct perception to begin with. And this is essentially where a lot of the distortion we experience comes from. It fuels imposter syndrome. It keeps you stuck in cycles no matter how you try. The same patterns show up in slightly different forms over and over and over again. This is what I'm talking about. And then as a collective, these outdated mental frameworks were built for a slower, simpler world. Can't really keep up with the speed and complexity of modern life. In addition to the fact that this theory hasn't really been updated since we had access to technology and all of the data we've collected on the way that the brain works and neuroscience and a fully immersive, evolved awareness of ourselves and our capacity. So, what if I told you that the ego isn't the problem at all? What if it's actually the solution? This is the breakthrough of the new ego theory. Instead of seeing the ego as an unruly force to be controlled or eliminated, we reframe it as a highly sophisticated, adaptable processor. Think of it like running the operating system on your computer, except this one is running your thoughts, decisions, and actions. When you shift your perspective, the ego goes from being your adversary to your greatest ally. It's not here to hold you back. It's here to help you process information, align with your goals, and become the person you were meant to be. So let's break this down. Imagine your ego is like a high performance vehicle. For years, you've been told it's broken, dangerous, doesn't work right. So you've been avoiding driving it. But here's the thing, this vehicle isn't the problem. You've just been handed the wrong instructions. With the new ego theory, you finally get the manual. You learn how to take the wheel, steer with intention, and accelerate towards your highest potential. And the reason why this shift is so powerful is that the ego becomes your partner. So instead of resisting it, you learn to direct it. It's adaptable, it's not fixed, it can grow and evolve alongside you. You take control, no more reacting on autopilot. You become the architect of your inner narrative. And let me tell you what happens when you make this shift. Instead of doubting yourself in moments of challenge, you act from a place of confidence and clarity. Instead of avoiding difficult emotions, you process them intelligently, gaining strength and insight along the way. Instead of repeating old patterns, you create new ones that align with your values and dreams. So, this is what the new ego theory is all about. It's not just about understanding yourself better, it's about mastering the architecture of your mind so that you can design your life with intention, precision, and power. I look forward to sharing more with you in the next episode. And if today's conversation sparked something in you, grab a copy of The New Ego Theory for a deeper dive. You'll find tools, choice commands, and the full Divine OS framework to help you take back control of your mind and your life. Thank you for tuning into this special edition podcast episode, and I look forward to seeing you in the next one.